Okay, welcome everybody. Very pleased to welcome you all and Bill Teatheredge from the Alfred Munnings Museum at Dedham in Essex. Um, so welcome to this talk on Alfred Munnings paintings in the Wensum Valley. Sort of say a little bit of introduction and then introduce Bill, and then we'll go straight to Bill's presentation and a bit of time for questions and answers at the end. So this webinar is a bit, if you've been to some of our others, it's a bit different from some of the others where we've talked about the ecology and even planning and things like that. This is really about the landscape. And I was reminded, actually, when I first got to know the area around Ringland about 10 years ago, went on a walk with some friends, and I was just absolutely amazed by the spaciousness of that landscape. And actually, later on, I'll put a little map reference in a Google map link to a place in the Ringland Hills where you can go and park and you can walk from there out across the landscape, and you just get the real sense of the openness and the Norfolk big skies. And I think another thing for me, which is really interesting about this talk, is I'm going to sort of mention a bit about how the Wensum Link Road, if it is built, is really a crime, a sort of crime against future generations. And it's very interesting to me that tonight we're looking at how Alfred Munning saw the Ringland Hills, and that was about 100 years ago, so maybe 3 or 4 generations ago. And it's really in our hands now to keep that landscape as it is now and not to impact on it further. And just to say a little bit about what the impacts of the road are, and I don't want to turn this into a sort of campaign thing. We're here to listen to Bill, but um, in the campaign, really, we see it as impacting at least three things in terms of what we leave for the future. And those are the ecology and the landscape, which I see as sort of one thing in a sense. But we know that the ecology there is there's lots of woodland, and in those woods there's a lot of wildlife we're only just beginning to find out about, particularly like the barbastelle bat super colony. Um, and then there's climate change, and we know all the new roads really impact on climate change. And this is really a moment where we have to really seriously think whether we can go on doing that, given what's happening at this very moment, actually, with the climate summit with President Biden and so on. Can we really afford to build any more of these roads? And then the third thing for our children is the debt that this road will leave. Because if the road is built, the Department of Transport will only fund part of it, and eventually that will become quite a small part, and the rest of um, the debt for building the road will land on council taxpayers, and it will go on for 50 years because they borrow the money for 50 years. And that will impact services and as well as the debt for people. So those are the issues, just in brief, on the campaign. I will, during the course of the um, meeting, just let a few more people in. Um, I will, during the course of the presentations, put a few things in the chat. And one of those will be an announcement of a crowdfunder, which we've got coming up very soon. Um, and the we're actually now beginning to really campaign as a campaign to, we really are going to go the whole way to try and stop this road. And we're now putting together a fund for the things we need to do immediately. In the future, we may be looking at serious legal work to help us at the planning stages and later. And so I'll put various links in. Please put questions into the chat as we go along as well. And I'll try to sort all those out by the time we get to the question and answer session. So now I'd like to introduce Bill. Bill Teatheredge, for 20 years, was a police officer and working mainly as a detective investigating serious crime. He says that among his many escapades, he was commended for bravery. And during this period, he developed a passion for art, which provided a release from the everyday tribulations of being a police officer. He was medically discharged due to an injury caused on duty, and Bill is now seriously deaf as a result. He decided to follow his love of art and retrain. He studied the history of art at the University of Essex, where he gained a first-class undergraduate degree, a distinction at Masters, and then a PhD. And in 2014, Bill began working as a curatorial researcher at the Munnings Art Museum, where he's now director, and where he's curated exhibitions, published, given talks and tours, and has even been used as an expert on the BBC's Fake or Fortune programme. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Bill, who'll share his slides, I think, first, and then move into the presentation. Thank you. Oh, can I just say, if everybody could mute, if you haven't already, I think virtually everybody has, so that's great. And I'll mute too.
Okay. Oh, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Bill Teatheredge, as Andrew's just explained. What I'm going to talk about this evening is Munnings in the Ringland Hills. I've called it The Wind on the Heath, which we'll come on to in a little while. The way I'm going to do this talk is I'm going to introduce Alfred Munnings, his early life. I'm going to touch on that. And then we're going to talk about his work in the Ringland Hills around Norwich. I'm going to put that into context of what he was painting at that time and why he was painting that type of thing. And then to finish off, I'm just going to go on and just finish his life story for you and talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about his art and the way he painted as well, some of his techniques. If this all comes together, it's going to be a miracle, but just sit tight. If you've got a glass of wine, enjoy it. And we'll kick off, I hope. Oh. There we go. That's me, Dr. Bill Teatheredge, Munnings Art Museum. And here's Sir Alfred Munnings. This was painted in about 1944. He'd just been made President of the Royal Academy. He'd just been knighted by King George VI. He was a rather important man. And it's not bad for a lad who was born on the Norfolk-Suffolk border in the middle of nowhere at a village called Mendham on the River Waveney. We go back in time here. Look, this is his father's mill on the River Waveney there. And you can see from this lovely picture the type of life that Alfred was living. You can see actually in the front of that picture a cart, a horse and cart, which brought the wheat up to be milled there. And he talks very lyrically in his autobiography about how you'd see a train of these horses and carts, a quarter of a mile long, going back from the mill, waiting to be brought up. And of course, what did he do? He drew them. And he drew and he drew and he drew. And he drew with his father in the parlour on a Sunday afternoon. And what he developed was a natural skill as a draftsman. This is a recovered part of his wallpaper from his room. And it's called Fire on the Prairie. And this was done when he was about 6 or 7 years old. And you can already see he's got the form of the horse, he's got the action, he's got the animation, which he's very good at all the way through his career. Natural draftsman right from the start. At the age of 14, he was apprenticed to Page Brothers in Norwich, who were lithographers. and they produced advertisements for chocolate boxes, Christmas crackers, etc. When he got to school leaving age at 14, his parents said, what are we going to do with Alfred? Because his elder brother, John, is got to take over the mill. And they said, all he can do is draw. All he wants to do is draw. So this seemed the best option. So for 6 years, Munnings did this apprenticeship. And basically, he was an ad man. He was learning the skills of lithography, printing, but is also designing things like this. So what you see here is his designs back then from 1893 up until about 1899. Some days he'd have to come up with 4, 5, 6 ideas for different types of adverts. He really was one of the first ad men, which you'd get back then. Every evening, he would go to the Norwich School of Art. So he'd work from something like 8 till 5 at the Page Brothers, and then go straight to the Norwich School of Art from 7 till 9, where he'd learn a traditional form of art. And you can see in this picture here, which was painted by him, the model room. And what they used to do is learn to draw from plaster casts of ancient statues, which you can actually see in this picture. So he learned about perspective, colour, light, design, etc. So basically for 6 years, from the age of 14, his life was all about art and learning about art. When he left Page Brothers, they asked him to stay on, but he wanted to become an artist in his own right. Now, 2 things happened then. First, he went to his auntie's farm and raced after his dog and went through a bramble bush, and one of the brambles caught in his right eye, and it blinded him for his rest of his life. So everything you basically see here from now on, he was painted with one eye. And he basically had to retrain himself how to paint with one eye, putting, paint on canvas. But he moved back to Dedham, and where he rented the old carpenter's shop. And here you can see Mr. Batchelor. This is a watercolour, almost photographic watercolour, which Munnings did at that time. And what he did is he painted people and places around Mendham. They were his models, gypsies like the Gray family who ran the shooting gallery there and the fair on the green. This is what he was going to do at that time. The gypsies, with whom he was very friendly, he'd eat sausages with them, he'd go to the pub with them, and he'd drink with them. The Gray family took him up to Lavenham, the old market town, just north of here. And they showed him his first gypsy horse fair. And you can see here the gypsies selling their horses. This is a very large painting, which he did back then. This was done in about 1901. And a lot of his work at that time were titled gypsy horse fairs, the normal fairs which were going on at that time. And these, again, were all things which were around this kind of circle within the area of Mendham. Now, here he is in his studio, actually painting away. Very dapper looking young man. Laura Knight, Dame Laura Knight, as she became when she first met him later on. She thought he's a very handsome man. And he did love going around in his tweeds, even between the wars when he went to the major London clubs. He still wore his tweeds and he still swore like a trooper. And he's very proud of this type of East Anglian accent he had. It did change, funny enough, when he became president of the Royal Academy, but there you go. So there he is painting away in his studio. Now, what I want to do, I want to put this in context, because here he is in the first decade of the 20th century, painting in the East Anglian countryside. By 1900, Britain was the first industrialised nation. That meant between 1800 and 1900, as you know, with the Industrial Revolution, there was huge changes in the whole countryside, brought on by things like the railways, the expansion of the railways from something like 1825 onwards, and even the telegraph as well. News travelled fast, trains travelled fast, people could get about more, people could hear more of what was going on. And of course, these major towns were being built, the major mill towns and cities. That meant that between 1800 and 1900, 2/3 of the agricultural workers moved on to what they thought was going to be better lives and better jobs. And that's basically decimating the countryside. It was worried at this point during the 19th century that a whole way of life was going to be lost. And so it was written about. And it was written about by people like George Burroughs of Norwich, who wrote his books about Jasper Petulengro, the Gypsy King, type of semi-biography books. And here you see actually Munnings' drawing done much later in 1913, celebrating Burroughs' life. And here you see Burroughs, the caped chap, taller chap at the back, standing with the Gypsy King, and they say, "There's a wind on the heath, brother, who would wish to die." And obviously very romantic books about this freedom, this lifestyle the gypsies led. There's another scholar, Matthew, his name's gone now, but there's other scholars as well who would write about this similar sort of thing. So there's a huge worry that this way of life was going to be lost. In 1888, they started up the Gypsy Law Society because there was this huge interest in gypsies, and they wanted to see, find out where they came from, etc. Because the gypsies were the antithesis to what was happening at the time, all this industrialization, etc., which was going on. The gypsies could roam free. They could go and stay in a hedgerow, etc., and type of live the life they wanted to live. Another thing which came about then was the Royal College of Music. Up to the 1880s, British music was dominated by Austro-Germanic music, Brahms, Mendelssohn, Liszt, Beethoven. So the British wanted their own music. They started up the Royal College of Music, and they got composers such as Vaughan Williams, John Ireland, Gustav Holst. And what Vaughan Williams would do was go out into the countryside, especially around this area, and if you're walking along, he'd ask you to sing a little ditty and he'd turn it into a major piece later. He would also visit gypsy encampments and, speak to them about their traditional music as well. So there's many things going on like that. Alfred Munnings was very much aware of this, and he took this all into account. But there is another thing going on at this time as well. And this was the gentleman gypsy. These were rich fellows who decided they wanted to live the life of a gypsy. So off they went in these tremendous Pullman type gypsies out in the countryside to live the life of a gypsy. But they would actually, go with a butler and footman. And as you can see by the interior of this particular caravan, very lush type of lifestyle. Some of them actually had wine cellars in, their caravans. So you couldn't get further away from the gypsy life, but it was very you know, the in thing to do at the time, and basically it's the start of the caravan club. Now, it was lampooned in a book of 1907. I'll just give you 2 seconds to think about what that book would be. Wind in the Willows, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Toad went out in his canary-coloured caravan, and of course everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So, you know, these type of things were going out on. They would know, you know, it was a whole fad. Munnings would know all this because he's a clever bloke. What he did was around 1904, 1905, he decided to move from Menden up to Swainsthorpe, 5 miles south of Norwich, and set up there at a farm. And what he did, he got a studio made for him by Bolton and Paul of Norwich. And it's half the studio, the furthest bit away where the chimney is, which he had made and erected in the grounds of the farm. This studio is now in the grounds of the Munnings Art Museum. It was one of the first things he brought down to the museum when he bought the house in 1919. So he did most of his iconic works there. But he was going to use this as a base to go off and paint around Norwich. So earlier on, around 1904, 1905, he went to Crostwick Common, which for him was, you know, type the British Idyll, the English Idyll. This is what he was looking at. This is what he was looking to do because he knew these paintings would sell. Because he knew of the interest and the fear that this way of life was going to be lost. He was an ad man. He knew what people wanted to paint. So here you see the type of farm folk sitting in their yard, having a chat, ducks, geese, whatever in the background, but this beautiful autumnal colour on the wood behind him. And here again, for Munnings, this was very, very traditional. He appreciated the countryside as much as anyone else. He didn't want to see it go as much as anyone else. He'd lived in this area all his life. So he knew exactly what he wanted to paint and how he wanted to paint it. He stayed at the White Hart at Crostwick and type of eventuate from there. But you can see these beautiful autumnal colours going on here. And typical for him as well, there's always a kind of workman-like thing going on in the background. So you can see the lad with the horses in the background and the sheep taking us off and basically pointing from the front of the picture to the back and pointing us in that direction. So typical of Munnings, he's leading us through that painting. Having been in Crostwick and other areas around Norwich, Munnings decided that he would paint in the Ringland Hills area. Unfortunately, with a lot of Munnings, he wrote 3 volumes of autobiography, and he's scant on the dates of everything. And because he wrote them 40, 50 years after they happened, again, he does get muddled up if he does get a date in there. But we're looking around 1906, 1907 that he first started to do his forays up there. But a little bit later, perhaps a year or 2 later, he decides to go up there, as he puts it, in force. So what he does, he buys a gypsy caravan, a cart, and numerous ponies to take up there to use as his models. He also has a groom called Bob, and a gypsy lad called Shrimp to be his model. And he said Shrimp was the best model he ever had. And Shrimp was only a little lad who basically tagged along with Munnings because he knew that Munnings had money. So what they did, one day, off they set in force up there, and on the side of the gypsy caravan as they left, Munnings wrote in chalk, Jasper Petalengru, direct reference obviously to the Burroughs books and the work he was going to do. Because this was all staged, but like I said, he knew what he wanted and he knew the kind of area he wanted to paint in. So this is a photograph at the Bush Inn in Cotsley. And here you can see Munnings with his back to us, actually painting at that time. And there's Shrimp. And the pony is called Augereau. It's one of, you see that pop up time and time again, this pony. And again, that's one of Munnings' favourite models. So off they go up there. Shrimp and Bob get drunk on the way up there and get a bit of a rollicking of Munnings. And they basically sleep under the caravan or wherever they can find somewhere. And Munnings puts himself up at the Falcon Inn in Cotsley and stays there. It wasn't in Ringland Hills for constantly, it was just basically in the summer season for about 3 or 4 years. So this is what he's going to paint. Now the title we've got for this is Gypsy Campfire, which is rather boring. And I've recently done some research on this. And the original title Munnings gave this is a lot more lyrical, and it's Where My Caravan Comes to Rest. So here you can see Shrimp with his yellow scarf on. And you can see the gypsy caravan that Munnings had brought. And the whole thing about this is the light. Our eyes are being taken off to the left-hand side of the picture there, where the sun is basically setting. And they're just brewing up their tea at this time. And the lurch are standing by watching as well. Here's another type of scene from the Ringland areas. And here you can see Augereau, the white pony there. And again, a similar sort of scene, they're brewing up. And we can just see through the trees there at the fields beyond. This is one of my favourite paintings, which Munnings did in his whole oeuvre. And here we have Somewhere the Sun is Shining. This is at the Bush Inn in Cotsley, and Munnings is up there with 2 friends. They're sitting at the far left of the picture. One of them is Oxford Don, who's come up there to stay. And one day they're sitting there having a drink on a Sunday, and 2 strolling minstrels were walking, one of them this lady here. And she starts singing this very well-known song at the time, Somewhere the Sun is Shining. And you can see from this picture, basically it's like a photograph, because Munnings is sitting there at his easel painting it, because you can see on the floor in front of us, his paint box open. So it's kind of painting it as it happened. And he talks about in the background, the honeysuckle and the smell of, you know, the whole smell and the warmth of the scene. I hope you'd enjoy this one, because this one, you got a whole view of the hills, the gorse, everything Munnings wanted to paint in the Ringland Hills, going off into the distance there. It's a little bit faded, this one. It's not the greatest reproduction, but you can see going off how he really enjoyed getting that landscape in there and the rolling nature of it. And he loved his gorse. He loved bringing that out. And of course, there's his ponies again. And he loved taking our eye off into the background in there, into that type of aerial perspective of bluey grey hue. Here's another one. I've never been up the Ringland Hills, and you know, I understand there's sand pits there, and this is obviously where Munnings did paint this. And again, you see Augereau and two other ponies. And again, it's a funny subject, but it's really about colour and light here. Munnings is trying to bring out the colour of the sand pits. And of course, the focal point is this white pony sitting there and that lovely light going across his back. We have this one at the museum, and if you have a close look at it, and if you see from here in the foreground, the colours in it are made up of pinks and blues and yellows. Just a massive impressionistic colour right in the Ringland Hills of Norwich. And here you can see actually Munnings in the background. There's another version of it there, and another one of him painting. And again, a very, very dapper man like that. This in his normal tweeds, painting away with his cigarette holder and his little bow tie. I was brave enough to go out at one point and buy myself a little kind of cravat just to try and emulate him at some point. But unfortunately, we're too busy wearing masks at the moment. But there he is, working away in his studio. And perhaps this is one you may know. This is the Ford, done in the Ringland Hills. I should imagine you can tell me better where the Ford is. He says the Ringland Hills. He doesn't specify exactly where. But here you can see Shrimp leading this string of ponies here. And this is a very important one for us at the museum because what you're seeing here are 14 ponies coming through this ford head on at us. So as an artistic technique, this is foreshortening the art of perspective, and he's doing it on a horse or on a pony. So you can see here how he's got the perfect form of those ponies, taking those off in the background. One thing he does do, you can see at the bottom right of the picture, he's cropped the legs of the ponies. So they're coming straight out on top of us. And again, a great technique. What Munnings was very good at was animating a painting. And you can see, as you look back through, how the water, how you can see the pony's hooves are, you know, splashing up with the water. And as well, again, he takes his eye through it in this great serpentine line from the front down to the back, so we can see this caravan coming through at the back. Again, here, typical of Munnings, what he was doing up that time, up in the Ringland Hills. Again, Shrimp with this train of ponies. It's all about freedom, ladies and gentlemen. Freedom of the ponies to roam, freedom of the gypsy boy riding. And he did many, many versions of this. And again, you can see the gorse as he does it. If there's one painting of this era which really sums it up, is this one. Shrimp on a white Welsh pony. There he is in the Ringland Hills. And again, we have this beautiful view over the hills. Aerial perspective again. And here we see Shrimp on his, on Augereau, bareback, riding along on a beautiful summer's day. This really sums up everything Munnings was trying to do. And coincidentally, at this time, Vaughan Williams was just composing Lark Ascending. So ever you want to sit there and look at this painting, listen to Vaughan Williams music. I could sit here all night going through all these various paintings. There's lots and lots and lots of them. That gives you an idea of the type of work Munnings was doing at this time. And it's very specific work. He knew exactly what he's doing. It's all about the English Idyll. It's all about freedom. And it's all about gypsies and having that freedom at the time of industrialization. But this is empty scenery. You just take it in and you enjoy it. That's what it's there for. This is what people wanted to see. Sorry, excuse me, it's me talking too much. Now I'm going to move on a bit. I'm going to come back to something later on, but I'll just move on now. By 1911, Munnings had completed his work in the Ringland Hills and he decided to move on. He decided to go down to Cornwall, where he met and married this lady in white, Florence Carter. Very sad time for him. He wanted to change the scenery in Cornwall with a rugged coastline, etc., and different light. He met her. He produced some wonderful paintings down there. That's where he met Laura Knight and the Newlyn School of Painters. Unfortunately, Florence committed suicide on July the 24th, 1914, just before the First World War. Now, during the war, Munnings went off to the front with the Canadian Cavalry Brigade to paint in 1918. He came back, made his reputation, and painted this in 1919, Tags Island. These are all his models and artist friends enjoying a drink after the war. And this is when he moved down to Dedham, bought Castle House. He met his second wife and married her, and his life changed dramatically. He started doing these commissions of very rich people who'd pay £500 a time for a painting like this, about £30,000 in today's money. It totally took him away from the type of paintings he was doing before the First World War, and he didn't like it, but he was making lots and lots and lots of money. He was painting royalty. This was commissioned by Queen Mary. This is going down Windsor Way, and the royal party going to Ascot. And this is the kind of life he was leading now. Here's his second wife, Violet McBride, on a beautiful horse outside a beautiful house. And there's Munnings there. And if you take a closer look at that picture, you'll see he's holding a picture of the picture, which is really my speciality was Renaissance art, believe it or not. And that's a very old trick from those times back then. Painting within a painting used as a signature. But they were leading a very, very good, wealthy lifestyle. It's something a lot of people don't know about Munnings as well. He's a sculptor as well. This is Brown Jack, done in 1935. He didn't do too many commissions, but the ones he did, as you can see from this clay model, which we still have, they were really rather very good, you know. And he's a very clever man. He's just an artist through and through. I said he was made president of the Royal Academy. He was made a knight. But in 1949, he decided to resign as president of the Royal Academy and made an infamous speech where he derided modern art, which he still hasn't recovered from, his reputation. But what he really did enjoy doing, apart from these, to get away from these portraits, were paintings like this. So to the left, you see September afternoon, two ladies in a canoe on the River Stour. And to the right is St Mary's Church, Dedham. And he did a whole series of paintings of what he called the barge on the Stour. Now, the thing was about Munnings, he was a great conservationist. And in 1938, he became first president of the Dedham Vale Society. And he used all the influence he could, which he had a great deal at that time. And as he went on to president of the Royal Academy as a knight, to preserve the Stour Valley, because there's lots of threats, especially after the war, of building on it. And with him and the rest of the Dedham Vale Society, they did preserve it. And they preserved it so well that it eventually became an area of outstanding natural beauty, which obviously it still is now. And they could, you know, nothing's been built there since. So we're very lucky in this area with that. But he was a passionate conservationist about that type of thing. And he wrote numerous letters to the Times and his very influential friends about that. So he loved this whole area, and he loved painting rivers. He loved painting the countryside. He also loved going up to Newmarket to watch the races. And this was done just before the end of his life. And he painted paintings like this, which is the start of the race. And really, it's just for himself. He enjoyed the colour and light and spectacle. And this is called Understarter's Orders, Cries of No, No, Sir. And again, he's kind of animated the whole painting. The horse at the back, number 13, if you saw this in real life at the museum, you see the front two legs are animated so much. There's about 6 of them, all grappling away. So again, he did lots and lots of stuff like this, but just for his own enjoyment. The way we look at Munnings now, unfortunately, he's had a lot of bad press. People look at him as old-fashioned because he's a representational artist. People didn't like his views on modern art. The way we look at him is a social historian. He was born in the Victorian age in 1878. He died in the nuclear age. He went through 2 world wars. He recorded the gypsies. He recorded the rivers. He recorded the portraits. And you can see here Her Majesty the Queen as well. He knew royalty. His whole life was about painting what he saw about him. But I'll just leave you with one thing. This is from his second autobiography. No, so his first autobiography, An Artist's Life. And this is the start of the chapter when he starts to talk about when he's going up to Norwich Way. It's called Around Norwich. Ringland and Cotsley on the west side of Norwich is situated in one of the loveliest districts of all the pleasant country surrounding that old city. Although only 6 to 8 miles away, with little variation, their serenity was unbroken, their peace continuous and unalloyed, the inhabitants living on the same unaltered ways of life, toiling and resting, their quietude and yet undisturbed by motor horn or sound of tractor. That's what he was painting. That's what he wanted to paint. And that's obviously, if you did have time to come down the museum when we open in May, they're the type of paintings you'll see. There you go. There's an overview. I could talk all evening and I could show you millions of paintings, but I'll try and condense it. I've tried to get it in context of what he was painting and why. And obviously, it meant a lot to him. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Bill. That was really, really interesting. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, so I don't know whether people just want to put hands up. Got the hand on the reactions thing. There's a raise hand thing you can put up to ask questions. I'd sort of kick off actually just to sort of fill the space. That I'll probably reveal that I know nothing about art history in this because I'm more of a scientist. But I thought the whole thing about rural ideal and everything is really interesting. I just wondered whether how much this sort of linked to the other sort of romantic movement in the 19th century and romanticism and so on. It seems some of those pictures you showed early on sort of seem to have resonances for me with some of the pictures from the romantics. But as I say, that's probably a very uninspired comment for someone who's doesn't know much about
No. He's Munnings was a good artist. He's a very good art historian as well. Sorry, excuse me, I've been talking a lot. He knew his artists, and one of the great influences on him was obviously John Constable. And so he knew art of all around that period. He liked Turner, he liked all those kind of artists around the 19th century, and he took a little bit from here and there from all of them, really. In his own style, to begin with, is rather impressionistic. But he lost that the more he did these portraits. And you see the one I'm showing here, Major Shackle, the huntsman. It hasn't got the fluency of the other ones. So between the wars, he was more guided by that, but he didn't enjoy doing it. He didn't enjoy doing it. And basically, I read something the other day. He said he only did them for Violet, his wife, so they could make money. He basically sold out a little bit. So, but yeah, you're right. He took influences from lots of people, So.
I think there's lots of comments, Bill. I don't know whether you can see the chat, but marvelous. Thank you, Bill. That was really informative, Bill. Thank you, very interesting. Great talk. Will definitely come to gallery, and I think a lot of us probably feel that way. It's not very far from people who are here from Norwich. It's not very far. And then a question here from Sue: was Munnings friendly with Augustus John?
Yes, sir, he was. He first met Augustus John down in Cornwall when he was painting down there. And this is a great story. They went out sketching one afternoon, and Munnings was lamenting about how to get a coloured sheen on a horse. And actually, you can see that study there of the horse with all the heads on it, with the sheen on the horse. He always liked to do that. And Augustus John turned around to him and said, if you're going to paint a horse, why don't you just paint it brown? And this is the difference between their art. Augustus John was a different artist. And with the gypsy side of it, Munnings painted gypsies. Augustus John never painted a gypsy in his life. All he did was paint his wife and his mistress dressed as gypsies. But they were friends. They're friends all the way through. They just had different ideas on art. under how to live their life, because obviously Augustus John did go off in a gypsy caravan all around Europe. But he writes how he tried to get the gypsies to pose for him, but they wouldn't, because they thought they were a bit worried, you know, that it's going to take their soul away and all this type of thing. But what Munnings would do, he'd buy him a pint and give him a shilling or two, and they were all right. So the East Anglian gypsies were fine. So.
We've got a question from Hannah Lenny there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
ahead.
I just wanted to ask, so in brief, what was his criticism of modern art? What
in brief?
Yeah, I'm sure it's long, but just in
no,
brief.
I can keep it brief. He liked representational art. He thought what Matisse and Picasso did wasn't art. It was just, type of mere splodges of paint and everything like that. And of course, what they did do, they ripped up the rule book of art and turned it on its head, where Munnings had learned perspective, colour and light. Obviously, Picasso, with their cubism, looked at it in a completely different way. And Munnings didn't like that. And he said, if you want to, in his speech of 1949, his final speech, he said, if you want to paint a tree, paint a tree. If you want to paint a cloud, paint a cloud. He didn't like, I don't know, boxes flying around in the air or whatever. So it was basically because he was traditional representational artist. So that was the difference. And obviously, you see the portrait there of the lady in red. That's Nellie Gray. She's a gypsy from 1907. If that was cubism, obviously we'd see every side of her face. They would be, flattened out. And he just couldn't see the point of that, basically.
I've got a question two questions in the chat, actually. One, Ian Robinson, really interesting that Munnings was influenced by George Borrow, a much earlier writer. Was Munnings trying to evoke an already bygone age with his painting in Ringland?
So was Munnings
trying to evoke an already bygone age with his paintings in Ringland?
Yeah, I think really is this. Munnings was a prolific reader all his life. So he read Dickens, Surtees, the whole lot. He didn't stop reading all his life. George Burroughs, he knew very well. And really, that was all an influence on him. And he knew all that before he went up to the Ringland Hills, yes. And he was going to paint there, like I said, the things which we're going to sell. Like you saw that beautiful painting of shrimp on a white Welsh pony. He knew people would like that and still like that. So, yeah, he knew what he was doing. And as you see again, the one I'm showing here with Dedham and the River Stour, you could go back and that could be John Constable, couldn't it? So he can go either way.
I've got one from Simon Flett. Was he affected by his experiences in the war?
No, he loved being out there. He went out there. Unfortunately, he tried to join up after Florence committed suicide in 1914. He tried to join up 3 times to just go to war as an infantryman because he's blind in one eye. So they wouldn't let him. It's an awful time of rejection for him, basically. He carried on painting gypsy hop pickers in Hampshire. And then he tried to do a little bit of work at a remount centre in Reading, looking after horses there, which would bring board in from all over the Commonwealth to go to their certain deaths. 8 million horses were killed in the First World War. And then Max Aikins, later Lord Beaverbrook, wanted artists to go out to France to paint the Canadians, and Munnings was chosen. And it wasn't an official commission. He was just a type of civilian artist going out there to paint. And he went out there with the Canadian Cavalry Brigade to paint them behind the lines, to show what they were doing behind the lines. And then in March 1918, the Germans launched their last major offensive, and Munnings was caught up in the Allied retreat, and he was taken off that and sent back behind the lines. But General Seeley, who was in charge, said he absolutely loved it. He didn't want to go, he wanted to stay. he loved that way of life. He really endeared himself to the troopers and the generals alike. So it didn't affect him. I think what affected him more was Florence's death at the start of the war. And then at the end of the war, he made his name through these paintings he did out in France. And that made him an internationally renowned equine artist.
There's a question from Sue Rowe. He did seem to have a looser style. Read The Gypsy Woman in Red. It's on the screen there. Is that right? And I think you can see that compared to the picture below of the huntsman, as you said.
No, that's right, Sue. That is the juxtaposition there, because you've got the huntsman done on his finery. Obviously, he knows what is dictating what he wants in that picture and the way he wants it. That was done in about 1922. Quite right, Nellie Gray, painted in 1907. It's a beautiful picture. Please come down and see that picture, because it's done wet on wet. So it's done very quickly. It's done all in red and scarlets, etc. I really don't know whether that tells us something about his relationship with Nellie, because red is lust and love in artistic terms. But you're quite right, it's a beautifully fluent picture. It's just like the paint is just still dripping off the paintbrush. And even the highlights, the shading on the nose and nostrils is in red as well. It's an incredible picture.
It's very, very vivid, isn't it? There's one final question here, I think, from Liz Brandon Jones. Can you tell us more about his interest in conservation?
Well, really, it was basically, he was a man of the countryside. As I've shown, he moved from one river when he was a child to another river, as he spent 40 years in Castle House, which is now the Munnings Museum. And he hated change. He hated modernism, not just in art, but he hated aeroplanes. He never drove. He was driven, but he never drove. He rode everywhere, even to a late age. He went sailing using the natural wind to push him along. So in 1938, when they wanted the Sun Inn in Dedham, which is a 16th century coaching inn, they wanted to knock down the archway to let omnibuses in full of tourists, so they could park in the back of the pub and have a few beers. And of course, that's been there since the 16th century. So Munnings was one of the ones who was up in arms about it. And from that, they formed the Dedham Vale Society, which went on after the war. After the war, they wanted to build a big waterworks down in the type of area you see in that middle picture. That would have been just a block for a waterworks around that area for the village. And so they said no. And Munnings, again, like I said, using his influence, wrote to everyone, got people down there. And like I said, the area of outstanding natural beauty came after his death. But they had a very, very strong society there to put pay to the expansion of the villages up and down the river.
Well, we've got to 8 o'clock, so thank you very much, Bill. I think it's probably a good moment to sort of call it, an evening. I mean, it's great you should end on that story of his conservation in Dedham, actually, because it made me feel that he would very much be in our campaign, actually, to do what we're trying to do, and people around the country as well, in trying to prevent desecration of the countryside and so on for you know economic reasons, really, at the moment. So I'd like to thank you very much. Immensely interesting. And did I pick up that you hadn't been to Ringland? And because
No, I have. I said before, I'd love to come up there and have a look at some point, and really, hopefully, this summer, because I've got sick of bouncing in the walls around this house.
Right.
And I really need to get out.
Yeah.
So please invite me out.
After yeah, exactly, yeah. No, I mean, when we can all stop bouncing around, it was June the 21st or something, that's they say. But yeah, I mean, in the summer, do come up, and we'll take you on that walk around the Ringland Hills, a group of us.
That'd be fantastic. That really would be felt. I'll stay up there, and I say make a couple of days of it. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it, and especially if it does change. But see.
I'm sure we could sort all that side out, but also some of the pictures we're able to sort of work out where they're taken. Like that one you had of the Ringland Hills very early on.
Yeah,
I think I know where that was it taken, painted.
Yeah.
I know where that was painted, I think, but now it looks sort of quite different. The all the vegetation and so on. And there's people here like Liz, if she's still on, who are sort of out in that area sort of nearly every day, looking at the ecology and so on. So I'm sure those people know where a lot of these pictures were painted. So it could
that'd be great.
Really
I'd love to. And this is only a small variety of them.
Right.
The trouble is, when I give a talk like this, I need things to focus on. But really, I could come up there with a whole portfolio of pictures.
Yeah.
I've done it. I've done courses around here where I've taken people around this area, and I had a chap who's an expert on constable, and he had a huge portfolio of every picture. He said that was done there, that was done there, that was done there. So it can be done.
Well, let's do that. And
That's smashing.
In the meantime, I'll say thank you very much. And just I sort of got a bit confused at the beginning when I said I was going to put the crowdfunder in the chat. We haven't actually finalized it, so I realized I couldn't do that, but I put quite a few other things. And if anyone who does want to join our mailing list, email me if you've got the email on the Zoom link or something, and we'll make sure you get on the mailing list. But I expect quite a few of you are already on the mailing list. So no further ado, I'll thank you very much, Bill, and call it an evening. Bye everybody.
All right, cheers, take care.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheerio.
Cheerio.
Bye bye.